Hi. In this video, I'm going to be talking about my conversion to the Catholic faith and sort of the long journey I took to come to know the truth and the beauty of the Catholic Church. It's going to be broken into 3 different videos because there's quite a bit of detail in this journey, as I'm pretty sure anybody who is a convert can attest to. We often have a very difficult and arduous path to the faith, and I would say that mine absolutely fell into that category. And so I will break this video into 3 different parts. And the first, I'll talk a little bit about my childhood and my spiritual upbringing, and how that kind of laid the foundation for me coming into the Catholic Church. I was raised my father is an Episcopalian, he's British, and so I was raised in an Anglican household, although my mother was a Presbyterian, and we attended a Presbyterian church when we were children. That church had a falling out, so to speak, where the congregation actually split into 2, and it was a very, very ugly experience. I don't remember exactly the catalyst. I was very young at the time, but I do remember there was a lot of anger and a lot of hurt around what happened in that faith community. And so I had been attending church as a Presbyterian for, I think it was the first 9 years of my life. We were active churchgoers. I sang in the children's choir. My mother and father sang in the choir as well. And my brother was confirmed there and actually thought about becoming a Presbyterian minister when he was a kid. That was something he was interested in. And so we were really active in our faith community. It was a big part of our life. And then, like I said, we had this split within the faith community. And I think for my mother, it really made her feel uncomfortable with sort of the clubby aspects of organized religion and how communities can turn on each other, which is, I think, very distressing, especially as a Christian. We're all supposed to love each other and work things out. And so when you see that sort of things sort of fall apart so catastrophically, I think it can have a very, very negative effect on a person and their willingness to be a part of organized religion again. So after we left that church, my mother, who is she's a professional musician, and she sang at that Presbyterian church. She ended up directing at a Mennonite church. And for those who aren't familiar, she ended up directing music at a Mennonite church. She was the children's choir director. And those who aren't familiar with the Mennonites, they are Anabaptists. They don't believe in baptizing infants. There are the Amish, which are part of the Mennonites. They're part of the Mennonite understanding, I would say. They are Anabaptists also, but they are a more extreme offshoots of the Mennonites. Mennonites can be anywhere from very normal, not normal, but very mainstream people, I guess would be a better word. They can be very mainstream, or they can be quite plain and sort of almost what we would think of as Amish, but maybe use a little bit of electricity and things like that. At this church was a very mainstream Mennonite church, but most of the church attendants there were culturally and ethnically Mennonite also. And so the Mennonites often have a shared family history. They come from the same places in Europe, and they often have names, similar names, Miller, Hochstetler, Yoder, things like that. So there is a really deep cultural understanding for Mennonites, and a bit of an ethnic background. Not that they're their own separate ethnicity, but they tend to be from like a Dutch and German background, and German Swiss. And there are others as well, but that was my experience when I was growing up. These are the Mennonites I was around. And I loved attending the Mennonite church. I had a deep fondness for it. And I especially loved their understanding of the gospel. I loved their I loved their pacifism, and that really stuck with me through my spiritual journey. Um, that sort of radical pacifism that the Mennonites had in that community that I was a part of. And although we never became Mennonites or anything, we were just singing in that church. But that really always stuck with me. And so I've always had a very deep fondness for that faith tradition. Um, After a few years, we left the Mennonite church, and I am a classical singer. And in high school, I started really delving into professional singing. And so I ended up getting hired at various churches around town to be a section leader or to be a soloist. I sang as a soloist in a Christian Science church for a long time. And I loved them. They were lovely. I like a lot of the churchy people that I'm around. Actually, I have a deep fondness for church communities. And also I sing in Jewish temples, sometimes in synagogues. And I love being a visitor in these places and sort of seeing how people interact and what matters to them in their community. I think it's really interesting. I think it's fascinating to see how they interpret scripture. And so I did greatly enjoy sort of touring around all the different Protestant churches. But I sang at a Christian Science church. I never considered becoming Christian Scientist. It was, I have a lot of respect for those people, but I couldn't, the theology did seem a little off base to me. Not that anybody was asking, and not, but it just didn't really strike me as a place that I would feel spiritually comfortable. But while I was singing at that church, my parents decided to join the local Episcopal church. And that is where I would say my real faith formation in a tradition that very much made sense to me, both culturally and spiritually, would be in the Episcopal Church. My father was Anglican. He grew up in England, and everyone in England it's the official church in England, for those who don't know. And so there is a deep cultural heritage for people who are English with the Episcopal Church in America, which is the American version of the Anglican Church, the English Church. And for those who don't know, the Anglican Church, which is what the Episcopal Church is part of, they broke from Rome, but retained a lot of their Catholic identity. And so they have a service that's almost identical to a Catholic Mass. There are hardly any differences, and they're all just slightly altered language. The Eucharistic prayers are slightly different, but they have almost it's so similar that if you did not know that those two churches were separate, you might, if you were a Catholic that maybe doesn't attend Mass that often, you might accidentally actually go to a Mass that is Anglican and not even, or Episcopalian or Anglican, and not even realize it's not Catholic. Unless the priest was a woman or something like that. But you wouldn't, it's extremely similar. There's a reverence for Our Blessed Mother. Many Anglican churches pray the Rosary. There's a real sense of the communion of saints. They, have prayers for the dead and all of the traditions that we have in the Catholic Church. They do not have quite the same understanding of doctrine, in that they're a little bit softer on changes in doctrine. And so the Anglican Church, or especially the Episcopal Church in America, have been a driving force in a lot of changes in the history of what is and is not considered kosher, so to speak, in the church. The Anglicans were some of the first Protestants to allow birth control. They were some of the first Protestants to allow female ministers and priests. And they also were one of the first communities to ordain openly homosexual priests and priestesses who were in a relationship. And so those are kind of the differences between the Anglican and the Catholic Church, although a lot of the traditions, a lot of the things that Catholics hold near and dear. The Anglicans do as well. They just have a very different understanding of mortal sin and venial sin and things like that. So I would say it's much less legalistic. And the other major part is that they do not believe that the Pope is the supreme pontiff of the church. They do recognize him as a bishop-ish. And so I have been to Episcopal churches where they pray for the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, much like the Orthodox Church does. But they do not have that really rigorous. Well, that's not the wrong word, but they don't have like quite as rigid of a view of morality as the Catholic Church does. And so anyway, so that was sort of the beginning of what I would say was really my Christian journey, was when we started attending an Episcopal church. And we did that in all through high school. We went to that church unless I was singing somewhere else or sleeping in, let's be honest. I wasn't always the best at, getting up and going to church in the morning. And so that was where I really started, thinking about Christianity. But because the Anglican Church is quite, there isn't a lot of moral formation, and I don't mean that the Anglicans are not moral or the Episcopalians aren't moral. There are some wonderful, wonderful, deeply faithful people that attend those churches, and the priests are, lovely people, but they don't have that rigorous, moral training and moral theology that the Catholic Church does. And so I definitely wavered a lot on what was and was not acceptable behavior when I was in high school and into college, and my early adulthood. And I think a lot of that was that I didn't have that really rigorous foundation in what is and isn't allowed. I was definitely very much led by my emotions, and did not use a lot of reason to make decisions, and did a lot of terrible things. I hurt a lot of people. I was a real pain in the butt in high school. My mother would say that God makes your teenage daughter so hateful that you don't care when she goes to college. Like, I was a very difficult teenager, not easy to live with. And so anyway, so that is the early formation that I experienced as a child. I was always drawn to the Catholic Church. I never went to a Catholic church, maybe for a wedding or something like that. But I will say, as a child, I was always drawn to the beauty of the Catholic Church. I loved the idea of confession, and I loved looking at statues of saints. And I definitely felt that pull into the Catholic faith. I just had no idea what that meant. And I always thought that, Catholics were, I thought all sorts of bad things about Catholics, I guess. But, that they had these crazy ideas about Mary, and they had these crazy ideas about the Pope. And, you pick up those things as a child when you're not Catholic that people say about them. And so I had a very bad opinion, I would say, of the church overall, especially as a teenager. But when I was a little kid, I still was like, wow, those statues are beautiful, and I really want to go to confession, and I feel super guilty right now and wish I could talk to a priest. And so there was always that little seed of faith in me. And so anyway, okay, so I'm going to finish this video here, and then I'm going to move on to the next video, and I will talk about my journey into the Catholic Church and what that looked like for me as a married woman, and how that all came about. And I hope you will watch the next video. Thanks, bye.